At its peak, the Vatican controlled nearly 16,000 square miles of land, making it slightly bigger than modern-day Belgium. But today, Vatican City is the smallest country on Earth and only controls 0.2 square miles of land, making it less than 1% the size of Disney World. This means that the Vatican was able to lose 99.999% of their land within 100 years. This begs the question, how is this even possible, and what happened to make the Vatican the smallest country ever? Before I answer those questions, let's talk about what exactly Vatican City is. The Vatican is an independent city-state inside of Rome, Italy. It serves as the spiritual and administrative headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. With a population of only 800 people, the Vatican is where the Pope lives, as well as some high-ranking officials and some priests and nuns. Despite its tiny size, just 110 acres, it functions like a real country, with its own governance, postal service, and even its own currency. Now, to understand what happened to the Vatican, we need to go all the way back to the fall of the Roman Empire. You see, when Rome collapsed in the 5th century, the Catholic Church did not collapse with it. Instead, it assumed a more prominent role. It stepped into the institutional void left by the empire, becoming a stabilizing force across much of Europe. As various tribes and groups divided what was left of the Roman territories, the Church maintained continuity, offering spiritual leadership, education, and a source of political legitimacy. It safeguarded classical texts, managed communities, and upheld literacy and record-keeping during a time of widespread social disintegration. Without the authority of the empire, new kings and rulers turned to the Pope for religious endorsement. Over time, the Pope's influence extended beyond religious matters. He was able to crown emperors, mediate disputes, and shape political decisions. As Europe gradually restructured itself in the aftermath of Rome's fall, the Church became deeply embedded in the continent's governance. This evolution laid the foundation for the Vatican's emergence as a territorial power in the centuries to follow. By the 8th century, the Church's influence turned into something more physical: land. In 756 AD, a Frankish king named Pepin the Short gifted the Pope a huge swath of central Italian territory known as the Donation of Pepin. That land became the Papal States. And just like that, the Pope wasn't just preaching, he was ruling. From the early Middle Ages through the Renaissance, these territories expanded, and the Pope controlled everything from Rome to Bologna to Ravenna. And this wasn't just symbolic power. The Pope had armies, collected taxes, and even waged wars. The Papal States had their own administration and operated like any other principality of the time. Roads were maintained, cities were governed, and treaties were negotiated. The Pope was not only a religious leader, but also a head of state. These lands gave the Church both prestige and practical leverage. It could defend its interests, exert pressure on neighboring rulers, and maintain political independence from foreign powers. At its height, the Papal States nearly covered 16,000 square miles of land, an area roughly the size of West Virginia. And the Church's influence extended far beyond Italy. Through alliances, crusades, and the sheer force of religious authority, the Vatican became a global powerhouse. Monarchs bowed to the Pope, entire kingdoms were excommunicated, and when the Age of Exploration began, the Pope literally divided the New World between Spain and Portugal in the Treaty of Tordesillas. This act alone demonstrated just how seriously world powers took papal authority. The Church also played a crucial role in legitimizing colonial efforts, sponsoring missions, and influencing the spread of Christianity throughout Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Catholicism became not just a religion, but a global force, with the Vatican at its center. Seminaries were founded across continents, papal nuncios were stationed in royal courts, and Catholic doctrine shaped political debates from Manila to Madrid. Even in non-Catholic territories, the Pope was viewed with respect or caution, depending on the context. The Vatican's soft power, built on faith, diplomacy, and tradition, made it one of the most influential institutions in the world during this time. But as powerful as the Vatican was, it was sitting on a ticking time bomb. By the 1500s, a growing number of people had begun to question the practices and authority of the church. One of the major issues was the sale of indulgences. Essentially, people could pay money to reduce their time in purgatory, which many saw as exploiting faith for profit. Critics also pointed to corruption among the clergy, the opulent lifestyles of church leaders, and the increasingly political behavior of the papacy. These grievances reached a boiling point in 1517 when a German monk named Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, challenging the church's practices and sparking the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation was not just a theological dispute, it was a massive political and social disruption. Entire regions of Europe broke away from the Catholic Church, including much of Germany, Scandinavia, and eventually England. This shift didn't just mean fewer followers, it meant fewer tithes, less political influence, and most critically, a dramatic loss of land and income. Cathedrals, monasteries, and church properties were seized by local rulers who embraced Protestantism, often enriching themselves in the process. The unity of Christendom shattered, and with it, the Vatican's dominance over European affairs. What had once been a pan-European institution was now increasingly confined to Catholic strongholds, weakening its grip on both spiritual and temporal power. The Vatican was no longer the unchallenged voice of Christianity, it was now one voice among many in a divided religious landscape. By all means, the Vatican's grip on Europe was slipping. Fast forward to the 18th and 19th centuries, and things were getting worse. The Enlightenment was spreading new ideas, like freedom of religion, separation of church and state, and democracy. Monarchs began to see the church as a rival, not a partner. Revolutions broke out, and in many cases the church found itself on the losing side. For example, during the French Revolution, the Catholic Church in France was stripped of its lands, its monasteries were dissolved, and clergy were forced to swear loyalty to the new secular government. Thousands of priests fled or were executed, and church property was seized by the government. This moment symbolized a broader shift. The church was no longer untouchable, it could be dismantled, disempowered, and even outlawed. But the real gut punch came during the Unification of Italy. In the mid-1800s, a movement known as the Risorgimento aimed to unite the many small, independent states and kingdoms that made up the Italian peninsula. You see, Italy was internally separated, politically unstable, and often under the influence or control of foreign powers. Austrians in the north, the French in the west, and the Spanish in the south. Unification was seen as the solution to creating a strong, self-governing Italian nation free from foreign rule and internal division. The only problem is that the Papal States stood in the way. Nationalist leaders like Giuseppe Garibaldi and Count Cavour, I'm probably butchering those names, wanted a unified secular Italy, and that meant they had to strip the Pope of his land. The timeline of papal losses unfolded like this. In 1859, the Papal States lost the legations, including Bologna, Ferrara, and Ravenna, to the Kingdom of Sardinia. In 1860, the Marches and Umbria were annexed following the defeat of papal troops at the Battle of Castelfidardo. By 1861, the Kingdom of Italy had been officially declared, uniting most of the peninsula except for Rome. The Pope's territory was now reduced to just Lazio and the city of Rome. In 1870, the only thing protecting the Pope's remaining territory from the Kingdom of Italy was French troops. However, with France distracted by the Franco-Prussian War, they had to withdraw troops from Rome, and Italy seized its opportunity. Italian forces marched into the city virtually unopposed, breaching the Aurelian walls at Porta Pia. The symbolic and physical fall of Rome marked the end of the Papal States. With the capture of Rome, the Pope lost almost everything: his land, his secular authority, and his long-standing political role in Italian affairs. And the Pope did not take it well. In 1870, after Rome was annexed by Italian forces, the Vatican was reduced to a small cluster of buildings and gardens, which is what we now know as Vatican City. Pope Pius IX, outraged by the loss of the Papal States and the seizures of Rome, decided to barricade himself within the Vatican walls. He declared himself a prisoner in the Vatican and refused to recognize the legitimacy of the Italian state. For the rest of his life, he would never step outside of the Vatican walls. And this act of protest didn't end with him. The next 3 popes all upheld this self-imposed isolation. They refused to leave the Vatican, avoided all official contact with the Italian government, and declined to appear in public. This lasted for 60 years. And the Italian government didn't want to take over the Vatican because it would make them look horrible in the eyes of the public. It became both a spiritual stance and a political message. The papacy would not accept a secular Italy that had stripped it of its sovereignty. The Vatican, once a kingdom in its own right, had become a defiant microstate, surrounded by the very country that had taken its land. This period, marked by diplomatic silence and physical isolation, lasted until 1929. That's when the Vatican finally made a deal with Mussolini's fascist government. In the Lateran Treaty, the Vatican recognized the Kingdom of Italy in exchange for one thing: sovereignty over 110 acres of land, which is now known as Vatican City. And just like that, what was once a sprawling empire became the smallest country on Earth. The Pope gave up 99.999% of his land to gain official independence. It was a compromise between power and survival. Today, the Vatican is a religious and cultural powerhouse. It has no military, no empire, and no territorial ambitions, but make no mistake, it still holds influence. Billions of Catholics around the world look to the Pope for moral guidance. The Vatican controls enormous wealth, priceless art, and a vast global network of churches and missions. Its physical land may have shrunk, but its reach with the people is still very real. That is all I have for you guys today, but I really hope you enjoyed, and click on another video right here, and I will see you next time.